So, welcome. You almost survived this course, last lecture, where we first going to talk a little bit about the feedback that we received for this lecture, and where you can also, of course, leave us more feedback later on. Then something like a recap plus call for action for the rest. I might have underestimated it last time a little bit, so we're going to take a little bit more than 40 minutes, but I guess not the full 90 minutes, so don't be worried. Good, then, first of all, thanks for the feedback in general, no matter whether it was bad or good. Since most of the feedback was quite good, we're also very happy. Even though we highly appreciate positive feedback, those outliers, I guess it's one person, are probably still the most interesting to us, because those are people that are not happy yet, and is there a way to make those people happy as well? So general feedback, quite nice, thank you very much. Then we had 5.1, which elements of the course did you like in particular, and 5.2, which parts of the course did you not like? We experimented a little bit with different exercise styles or seminar styles throughout this course, or in this semester. We did it partially different last year, so very happy that this also only shows up on the positive list. It's always a little bit more difficult if you have some people who say, I like the exercises, and others says, I hate the exercises. But here it's nice. So exercises remain, discussions, open environment, also very happy about that. And also that the thought experiments at least found a minimum of one person who liked it so much that they put it down here. So thank you very much. What parts did you not like? I actually got a similar comment before, and it's also not quite uncommon if I give like talks about this outside the university, that this is a very common reaction, that people say, like, this is a very depressing topic, this is not fun, it feels horrible to sit here and listen to this. And yeah, imagine that being your job. No, it's not that bad, it has certain benefits to work here, but sure, I would like to tell you a lovely story that everything will be fine and you don't have to do anything and so on, but evidence suggests that this is not the case. And why? Like, you're grown-up people, so there's no need to be a father figure to you and say everything will be fine, you will do well, everything is great, don't worry, if that's not the case. So you're grown-up people. This is a post summary of facts, and if they are depressing, then please do something. But I still like, I share that feeling, because a lot of this stuff also doesn't make me happy. If you have suggestions to make this, like to avoid that, or to, if it occurs, then handle it better, very much open for any suggestions. So like, we take it serious, but I think it's like hard to do it without the dark part. So maybe figuring out ways to deal with the hard part in a more productive way could be on the agenda, but let's, yeah, we'll think about it. Good. What suggestions for improvements do you have? 2 people answered with an empty response, and 1 person essentially then was addressing the previous negative feedback, like more positive examples. Talking about solutions, and not always like trying to see things from the extreme perspective. And then like just in English translation, this feeling of sitting in or driving a car. Oh no, or like having a car driving to you and you can't really move left or right. Yeah, I mean, this is a little bit what our current situation looks like, but okay, I get that point. So we could try to incorporate some success stories, but in comparison to the not so successful stories, we'll probably have to dig deep. And the extrema part, yeah, I have to think about that. But long story short, we'll take that feedback. Thank you very much. If you have more feedback, please let us know either in person or drop us further emails. No matter what the feedback, it's not going to impact your grade, so don't worry. But those, like what I just said, are essentially just only our first thoughts on the feedback. We will sit down and have a closer look what else we can make out of this. Good. So now to the recap part. What was this course all about, and what did we cover? So since you're already preparing for the exam, I have two people sitting here now who would very much like to share the definition of sustainability. Come on, guys, any idea? Something with future generations, needs? So this is like crucial for the exam. So development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. This was, after some introductory context, one of the very first definitions we started with. And in context of this whole discussion, what is more sustainable or less sustainable and what makes sense to do or not, like you should have a common understanding of what sustainability could mean. One definition, you can also come up with other definitions from other sources, but you need at least one for the exam, please. Because it was one of the cornerstones of this lecture. Okay, so what is sustainability? And from there on, we went, okay, how can we get there? One of the main implications that I repeated over and over again is that one of the most sustainable things to do that you can do right away is often consume less. No matter whether you switch from normal beef to vegan beef, like it would still be more sustainable to not eat it in the first place. I mean, food is now a really bad example, but you get the idea. We discussed that in person, in great detail. Then we went into the different three challenges that we initially highlighted in the introduction: climate change, resource scarcity, and environmental pollution. For the climate change part, we looked at the foundational definitions that you need. What's our carbon emissions? What's the greenhouse gases? What's global warming? How do you define all of that? One of the key figures that is not very positive, but nonetheless true and concerning, was this key figure of different emission pathways starting from 2019, where we essentially compared to what the pathways should look like if we want to keep the 1.5 degree global warming goal, what to do for 2 and other degrees. It also included the pathway for what happens with the Paris pledges and the Paris Agreement. They want 1.5, but what they pledge to do results in this, our current policies in comparison. But, and now the uplifting part, what would have happened with no climate policies in place were substantially better than what could have been true or what could have happened, but still we're not quite where we wanted to be. We also then, after having essentially like a lower threshold, so we're not going to get back to 0.5 degree global warming because we're already at 1.7, 1.6. So after establishing this lower threshold, what's the upper threshold? And we also came to the conclusion that there are not really concrete answers to that with respect to like what can we survive as a human species? Like when does it not matter to bother anymore? And it's really hard to get any proper data on this because it's a very difficult question. We had this one reference from Michael Mann, professor at Penn State University, who said, okay, 2.7 already quite critical, beyond 3 doesn't look so great. So within the 1.5 that are already gone, and what we're currently doing with 3.2 as a maximum, we're still in this place of, oh shit. Afterwards, environmental pollution. We used that a little bit as a stepping stone towards a circular economy, where we discussed how, like in various examples, that we as humans are very good at producing things and then ignoring the waste that it creates, either after utilizing a certain product or even while manufacturing a certain product. And just the idea of throwing nuclear waste into the ocean in unmarked and not salt-resistant barrels was one of those great ideas, but it's an example of just how careless we act in terms of waste or environmental pollution in general with our environment. Because if I don't see it anymore, if it doesn't hurt me immediately, it can't be that bad. So we're very focused on producing things, but not looking or understanding properly how we could do that in a manner that doesn't destroy our planet. We also talked a little bit about resource scarcity, that certain resources will not greatly benefit from first climate change in general, but also from the fact that we're almost like that they're closing in on 10 billion people on this planet, and less parts of this planet are habitable, but also you use a lot more resources with 10 billion people instead of 1 billion people. So resources like arable land for farming, fresh water, definitely two aspects that are heavily impacted by climate change. You also have this problem of extreme weather events becoming more regular. So instead of having rain over 6 months distributed, you have 5 months drought, 1 month where it rains like hell, or just like a few days. And that also then, of course, impacts resources like freshwater supply, or where you apply that fresh water that you collected, for example, in the farming context. So this is more or less like where environmental pollution and climate change can have an impact, but also like from the resource consumption perspective, we have a finite system. We can't do what we're doing right now indefinitely, where we take out more resources from the planet than it can regenerate or that we can recycle. So at some point in a finite system, you're like, okay, done, let's close shop. So we also discussed that in quite a lot of details, and that then finalized our list as 3 of the key challenges of the 21st century. I'm not gonna argue that those are not, like there might be more challenges, essentially what I'm saying, so like different aspects that we did not cover in this lecture yet, but I would say those 3 are definitely at the top, or the rather upper field of problems that we need to tackle in this century, otherwise we don't need to bother anymore. Good, then we try to look a little bit at a bigger picture and go back to our computer science math roots. So when you have such a complex system and you want to understand, okay, this is where we are now, it's not good. What if I do this? Okay, this happens. What if I do this? Okay, this happens. So this is where models have been used for quite a while. So the intuition of putting this complex system of our society, of our planet, into a model simulation came quite early with the World 2 and World 3 models in the 1970s. But it serves also like us now as a good starting point, because if you want to reduce resource consumption, you first need to know, okay, where are we standing right now? What can I do to reduce it? And does it really reduce it in the long term? Same with impact on farming practices or farming outputs or society and the birth rates and so on. So like there are different aspects that play into each other where you can't, like where we might have a gut feeling what the result of a certain change is, but it's the more complex it gets, the more difficult it is to make proper predictions just on gut feeling. So those models are quite nice. Since we're talking about a global problem, the World 3 model essentially offers itself as a first piece there, because it looks on our planet as a complex system, not what should Germany do, what should Brazil do, what should Turkey do. And we looked a little bit into the history of this model, looked a little behind the curtain where it came from and what it can do well and not well. There is a lot of criticism for this model. There are also various advantages of this model. But for the sake of this short recap, let's just have a look at this World 3 standard run, the business as usual model from the 4 models that we looked closer into. And essentially the main problem that then plays back into our lecture series is that if we continue business as usual, we'll have at some point a certain population drop, a quite drastic population drop, because we have extracted so many resources and so polluted our environment so much that it's not supporting the amount of people anymore. So there's going to be a sudden and drastic drop. Obviously, we would like to avoid that drop because no one wants to make the decision who's supposed to live or die. and then essentially trying to establish what measures to take. Where we would like to be was the fourth model that we looked at, the stabilized world scenario, where the population stabilizes in the 21st century. And not just that, is also do human welfare and other aspects that make your life quite nicer compared to the business as usual model. From there on, we had a short trip to life cycle assessments before we came to the linear and the circular economy, because on the World 3 model, we looked at everything from a very abstract high-level perspective. We assumed our planet being one finite system. LCA is now the equivalent for one product, one service that you dissect in a lot of detail to then make a decision, okay, how harmful is it to the environment? What if I compare two products here or two options, which one causes more harm or less damage than the other? So I think we had the dishwasher example, if I'm not mistaken, as a very simple example that you can use for or that you can relate to maybe from your personal life. We also had the question of internal combustion engine cars versus battery electric vehicle cars in terms of sustainability as one of the LCA examples. So you get an idea why it makes sense to have an idea what an LCA is, how it roughly is structured, and what are the pitfalls of an LCA, especially in terms of what underlying data I assume to be true or most closest to reality. So World 3, high level, one planet, one Earth, one population. LCA is very specific for a similar reason. Then we finally made our move to the circular and linear economy. Before we got into the circular economy, briefly looking at the linear economy, essentially what we're mostly doing right now. We're extracting resources, we make a product of it, we use that product for a while, then we throw it away and just get new resources that we extract from the ground. Sounds like it's not really sustainable. So circular economy comes to the rescue. Instead of having one long linear line, we're now trying to create circles that help us to keep resources in circulation. So first we produce a product as we did before, maybe already considering design decisions that make it easier to then fulfill the next three circles that we discussed. But let's say we first manufacture something, then we use it. While using, there's already the idea of also sharing it, because most of the time you can't really utilize stuff that you have to 100%, because sometimes you sleep, sometimes you have to work, sometimes you have to study. So usually a lot of your stuff is often underutilized. So sharing is one way to do that. Most popular example, usually car sharing. You don't need a car yourself, share it with others. Once you're done using something or sharing something, there might be an opportunity to go to the first circle where you reuse it. So you have a smartphone you don't need anymore, give it to someone else. Or if it's a broken smartphone, it might be able to repair it. If that's not the case, or if that is the case, we go back into the normal use and share cycle. If that's not the case, we look into refurbishing or remanufacturing parts. So more complex, more difficult than just simple repair. Bring it back to the normal cycle. Maybe it goes also back to the reuse repair cycle, you never know. And only if all of that doesn't work out well, we go to recycle and recover with the aim and focus of keeping as many of the initial input resources that we provided as possible and getting them back, so that in a best case scenario, there is no external flow of new resources into the system. It's essentially a self-containing cycle. We're very, very far away from that, but at least we have an idea where to go. So it's not a perfect solution yet, but it's at least the direction that could be promising. We also looked at some sub-flavors of the circular economy, namely the performance economy. Would someone like to explain the performance economy already? Enthusiasm is not your strong suit. Good. So essentially the idea was I do not buy a product anymore because I want to have that product, which is usually not the case anyway. If you have to set up a frame with a picture or to put something on your wall where you need a nail or a hole in the wall, you're traditionally buying a drilling machine. But you don't want to own a drilling machine. You want to own 5 holes so you can hang your pictures on images. That's what you want. And that's essentially the core idea of the performance economy, that you stop selling products, but rather services or performances. That gives you the link to the name of the performance economy. You're just interested in performances. Drilled holes, parcels delivered, liters of pasta made. You're just interested in the performance and the result. And we looked into a few examples here. So the drilling machine as a service, or the drilled holes as a service, as one example. Again, car sharing, or if you look a little bit further into the future, autonomous car share or autonomous transport fleets of autonomous cars offering you to transport you from A to B could also fall in this direction. But like all of the ideas essentially come down to this point: we are selling performances. And if you sell a performance, you're suddenly in a very different model when you look at it from the perspective of the manufacturer. Previously, a manufacturer was interested in selling as many drilling machines as possible. After they have sold the drilling machine, there was almost no business to be made anymore. If you're now stopping to selling the actual machines, but rather giving them to people to do a job or to have someone perform a job, then getting it back, you suddenly have a completely different incentive how you build and manufacture your products. While in the old traditional way, you would like to sell as many drills as possible, make sure that they don't last very long so that they come back directly, buy more. So you're essentially just interested in selling as many as possible, while here you're interested in drilling as many holes as possible, while at the same time reducing your cost of having to manufacture large amount of drilling machines, sorry. So very different model, and you can already very clearly see the incentives here from a sustainability perspective. If it's not about just pumping out as many drilling machines as possible, but rather drilling holes, you suddenly build drilling machines that last longer, that are easier to repair, easier to maintain, have a better quality in itself, because you're never selling it yourself, you're just selling the holes. And you want to maximize the output of drilled holes per resource or atom of resource that you put in there. That's a completely different approach than we had before. And while not everything is like suitable to be part of a performance economy, I would say, like brushing your teeth maybe, there are some aspects of our economy that could benefit from a performance economy approach. At least it's like a direction worth looking into. When we then later wrapped up the circular economy, we were quite happy because finally a solution to all our problems. But then we also discussed a little bit the shortcomings of a circular economy. The main shortcoming was that it does not really address a core problem of why we are in this climate change and resource scarcity and environmental pollution mess in the first place, and that is the degree of consumption that our society perceives to be normal, and that consumption and consuming goods and services is a major part of our society. Because so essentially we're consuming more than we actually need because we can, and if we wouldn't have that in the first place, we would like solve a lot of our problems. And the circular economy is not trying to reduce the amount of things we consume. It's essentially just trying to decouple economic growth, so producing and consuming more and more and more, from resource consumption. So essentially it's just trying to close this minor loophole of having a finite system with infinite growth. So it's like the idea sounds quite tempting. I can have eternal economic growth, but have no resource limitations. It sounds quite tempting, but doesn't really address the underlying problem, which could also be quite valuable to just say, okay, maybe we don't need to base our existence on consumption of goods and services that we're advertised to. That would be much, much easier than putting millions or trillions of dollars into making recycling stuff more perfect. It will solve a lot of problems. What you don't have, what you don't produce, you don't have to recycle. And that cannot cause any damage on our society. And this is a little bit how we ended up with this figure. Because initially, or usually, when you have a product or a service, you always have the upper part of the diagram. This is the value it adds to your life. This is how it makes your life easier. This is how it makes you happier. This is the reason why you should pay me, because I'm adding so much value to something on your behalf or that you're interested in. The part below is often ignored. And this is also why we're so positive towards consumption, because we usually ignore the lower part. That with every product that you use all the time, your jacket, your trousers, your shoes, the pointer, the beamer, it all occurs a cost towards the environment in terms of damage. The resources have to come from somewhere. There's definitely environmental pollution in between, but there are also social aspects involved in this where suffering and damage occurs, being it sweatshops where you produce cheap consumer electronics or getting rare earth materials out of the ground using child labor. You can find a lot of examples why this is my bad, but you always ignore this part. So this is also what the circular economy ignores. So this is how circular societies became a thing. So it's not just about fixing this resource consumption versus, I need more coffee. Resource consumption infinite growth problem, so that you just make sure that you get enough resources back problem, but you also have social aspects here involved. So circular economy replaces the linear economy. Great, if we can do that, that will buy us a lot of time and help to alleviate our problems. But it's probably not gonna be enough to just continue doing what we're doing by just relying on having a circular economy system. It also mostly focuses on end value management, so what kind of value was added, and ignores everything else. That includes resource consumption, environmental damage, but also something like power asymmetrics, social injustice, social inequalities, and that's where circular society tries to get into the game. So how do they do this, or what are building blocks, attempts, puzzle pieces to get there? One part could be so-called sufficiency strategies and lifestyle changes. So if I just consume less, we'll all be better off. It also helps to question the current system, like, do we have to do this? Could we maybe change this since there is some kind of an emergency coming? There is this car coming at us. To maybe follow the metaphor from the feedback. And also deconstructing existing political systems and then see how to put them back together. Especially the last 2 points, very vague, not so much computer science, totally get that, but I wanted to put them there for the sake of completeness. We also looked at some different circular society and circular economy perspectives, namely those 4 here. And I think there was also a homework where you could argue in favor of, or essentially discuss what is your favorite perspective, which one would you like to be implemented, or which one would you deem more likely and usable. Reformist? Tech-centric? Transformational or fortress? You should have argued that in your homework. You could now really quickly interject that you don't remember anymore. Okay, 2, 3, 4, 1. Good. No consistent voting from the audience. So I'm not going to ponder too much on this. just saying that even within this, okay, we acknowledge that circular economy is not perfect. Let's think about to incorporate circular society aspects. Even within that directions, there are different sub-directions. So for circular economy and circular societies, how to approach them and what the goal is from the specific perspective within those directions. That can vary. I want you to, of course you don't have to recite this in the middle of the night when we wake you up, but having the understanding that circular society is not just circular society. If you have also seen that in the lecture from Daniel Goldman, where we talked about developing circularity, he also used circular societies as a term there. It's not contrary to how we use it here based on the definitions from this lecture, but you can already see there are different aspects to it. And this is why we briefly touched this point, why also Daniel gave his lecture, so that you get an idea, okay, circular society or circular economy, when people talk about this, it's not just this one thing. It's more complex, as most things are in life. Good. More coffee. Then we looked a little bit into those sufficiency strategies that were supposedly, or could be supposedly, a puzzle piece in a circular society of our future. And that begged the question, okay, what is eco-sufficiency? We looked at some definitions. We also talked about eco-efficiency and some other eco-consistency, and there was something else that I didn't remember now. But essentially, eco-sufficiency being, according to the IPCC definition, a set of policy measures and daily practices that avoid the demand for energy, materials, land, water, and other natural resources while providing well-being for all within the planetary boundaries. So quite similar to the sustainability definitions. So essentially use the resources wisely that you have to cover your needs. And what this implicitly has as part of the planetary boundaries is also this keep the people in the future in mind. So if you have trouble learning the two definitions, they're quite similar. There's a lot of common ground in between them. And as for many things, we always had a little bit of a short handle, instead of the whole definitions, the short handle could be sufficiency, could be described as all you need is less. Of course, with a footnote that you please cover your needs. And the last lecture, if I'm not mistaken, we then also took, or in the last two lectures, we first had a very long essentially an introduction part to the actual topic of last week, where we talked about universal basic income. But as part of this, okay, does the system, as we have it right now, make so much sense, or should we maybe think about changing it, deconstructing it, building something else? We had this detour with David Graeber's bullshit job book or article, where we looked at one specific area of economic criticism that, according to his study and the people reporting on this, that there are quite a few jobs that don't seem to really contribute to society or are even damaging towards societies, but people are still doing them. And essentially, the whole long story after categorizing different jobs into how they are harmful, how they are bad, what's the problem with them, we essentially got to this point, okay, it seems like we have more people who can do more work than actually necessary. If we now say, okay, then let's just do what is necessary, you automatically have this question, okay, what do those people now do for a living? They will starve to death. And one of the potential solutions towards that, or potential building block, could have been the universal basic income. That's why we also looked into that. That excludes, of course, a lot of other building blocks. We just don't have enough time. I have so many ideas for this course, we just need more time to build them. And then you also have to probably do 10 credits instead of 5 credits on this course, but there's, of course, so much more to it. But as with so many things in this course, we at least wanted to give you a glimpse into those building blocks so that you get an idea, okay, this exists in this space of knowledge. So, long story short, back to universal basic income, potential building block of a circular society. What is it? We talked about the definitions. We noted that there are various definitions. We also had this three-dimensional cube where we had different dimensions of universal basic income that either made it very promising to everyone, where you just say, okay, it's really universal, everyone gets it, no matter how much you get. It's an income that you can spend any way you like, and you get it in cash and regularly, something like that. So essentially the no strings attached version, while there are also, depending on which of the dimensions you follow, have options where certain aspects are more restrictive. So maybe it's not universal, not everyone gets it. Maybe there are restrictions. Foreigner doesn't get shit. National people get more. You could have also sexual discrimination or biases. Long story short, you get the idea. Depending on where you go, you might have more constraints, while the universal basic income really means everyone gets something on a regular base, no strings attached. And now, where does this bring us? Because even though we've talked for quite a while here in front of you and gave you a lot of things to think about and a lot of homeworks and asked for a lot of discussions, we still didn't really tell you what to do now, or at least we did not present the master plan on what to do now. The main problem is I don't have it. And I also don't feel very confident in presenting any of the other plans out there to do something and claiming, okay, this is the perfect solution. So essentially what we tried to do with this course of first giving you foundational knowledge to have a proper discussion about this topic, and then presenting you problems, potential directions where solutions could live, thinking and looking slightly into some solutions like universal basic income, but hopefully also presenting you, okay, those are still the challenges left, or why this might be a bad idea. And especially the last part about this might be a bad idea is what a lot of ideas suffer from that are in this space of saving the planet. So now what? What are you supposed to do with this knowledge? First, teach others, of course, but also do something. Like, I'm not running around in front of you for a whole semester just because I have to. No, because I want you to do something. We're giving you all the background knowledge, we're making you ideas, or like trying to give you ideas where you can act right now. We've talked about food sharing, we talked about other activities, so do something. Because in the first lecture we talked about this very depressing perspective that we're more or less doomed. And there was this quote from Kate Marvell from the NASA Goddard Institute, if I'm not mistaken, who was asked to, at something like a climate conference or some kind of a presentation, to end with an uplifting note where she said, okay, yeah, sorry, don't have good news. Like, what's the point of telling you everything is fine if it's not? Like, something that we also follow in this lecture. And she then talked about the fact that this is like, okay, that it looks shitty, but we still can do that. Because the opposite of hope is not despair. It is grief. And even while resolving to limit the damage, we can mourn. And here the sheer scale of the problem provides a perverse comfort. We are in this together. The swiftness of the change, its scale and inevitability binds us into one broken heart strapped together under a warming atmosphere. We need courage, not hope. Grief, after all, is the cost of being alive. Courage is the resolve to do well without the assurance of a happy ending. Because what else do you have to lose to do something? And this might also a little bit be addressed to that feedback that we received earlier, that a lot of this stuff here is quite dark. And as I said before, yep, you are correct, but it's also a little bit up to you to do something about it. And even if it looks dire, that doesn't mean that your life has to be dire. So those are two separate parts. And a lot of happiness also comes from acting and not, like, there's one image that I always like to include here, but we don't have the copyright to recreate it. That essentially goes along the line, no matter how, let's put it the other way around. One of the very depressing things about something like climate change or environmental pollution, things that you can't really grasp on a whole, like, global level, is that it makes you paralyzed. And that makes you depressed. That does not really spark joy. And doing something, even if it's just a small, minor things, gives you some kind of action in this game back. I know it's small, but it's something, you do something. And for those of you who already tried that in different variations, you don't have to do it for climate change or something else, doing something helps to alleviate this paralysis and this feel of suck, or that your life sucks, or that everything is very depressing. So please do something. Whether your vision or the direction that you would like to support is even listed here, or something completely else, or you find like aspects of, for example, a transformational circular society to be the vision of the future that you would like to see, do something in that direction. Like, we're not saying do this, do that, do that. Like, please choose your future. But general, like super simple things that we try to incentivize you in terms of thinking about it throughout this lecture. For example, the waste collecting exercise was essentially to make you aware of certain aspects that you can quite easily change, minimizing the amount of waste that you produce. Do you need the packaged stuff, or is there a way to go for the unpackaged stuff, or do you need the thing in the first place? Essentially questioning your own behavior. Doing something like food sharing. Like, people throw away thousands of kilograms of food every day in Braunschweig and no one picks it up. Have fun. It's quite nice. You can, like, at least in Braunschweig, you can live based on food sharing if you want to. There's enough resources. We're just wasting large amounts of it. So the second thing you can do right away. Or third thing, actually, if you add consuming less. In general, of course, taking responsibility. Yeah, I deserve that flight to New York because I'm stressed and I work so hard. Yeah, I could also read a book, also nice. But essentially taking the responsibility, like, even if you go to New York, do that, but take the responsibility of saying, look, I've done this kind of damage to our society, and I did so because I felt good about it. That's like, take responsibility. Yeah, I planted a tree, and now everything is fine, and afterwards I picked up that plastic straw. Now everything is good. Nope, that's not taking responsibility. That's just finding a weak excuse. So take responsibility. Be accountable for what you create and the damage that you cause, but also, of course, take credit where you don't do so. Many of the aspects of a circular economy when it comes to sharing, reusing, repairing, essentially cover a lot of those things here. Also reducing the waste that you create in the first place. For most of you, zero waste is probably unrealistic. That doesn't mean that you have to give up on waste minimization in the first place. Having 25% less than you had last year still makes a difference. So there are a lot of small things you can do that are maybe inconvenient. Sure, food sharing is more complex than just going to a supermarket and grab a pizza. Sure, minimizing your waste is more complex, but it's something you can do right away, no upfront cost required. So do it. We talked already about the flight towards New York for gratifications. Even though I'm standing here praying to you to be more sustainable, of course, I also had this phase where I did stupid things. I very much like skydiving, one of the greatest experiences you can have. But climbing into an airplane, going to 4,000 or 6,000 meters, jumping out, climbing back into that airplane and doing the same thing over and over again is an extreme amount of fun, but definitely not the most sustainable thing you could do as a hobby. So I like it very much, but no skydiving left anymore. And in the end, like, when you have to, or when you're looking for advice like where to go from the sustainability perspective, usually this consume less approach leads the way. It's not always the idea, and it's also probably quite depressing to just live off dry rice and toast, even though it's very resource minimizing maybe. I don't know, I haven't calculated it for us. Like, it doesn't have to be just a sad experience, but if you have the choice to consume less, it's probably the most easy way to go. There are also, like, from the perspective of, okay, now I'm reducing what I'm doing, of course you can also go for activities that provide something to someone else, so not just reducing your footprint, but also helping others to reduce theirs, providing something to them. There are repair cafes. for example, here in Goslar at Goslar Höfe, where people can go and repair their stuff. Last time I talked to them, we're looking for people who help. There are maker spaces, for example, in Braunschweig that have a similar mission. You have sharing opportunities where either you offer your stuff to share with others, or when you need something, you look for sharing services. The Goslarschen Höfe also have a big second-hand shop for pretty much everything from clothing to furniture, kitchen cutlery, and I don't know what. Same is true for a lot of other services that you can get second-hand. Second-hand smartphone works quite nice. Second-hand computer, okay, not an option via the university, but I had second-hand computers before. As a very nice economic incentive, but of course also a sustainability-related incentive. So it's not just like, it's too much effort to repair it. Take it as a challenge, do something, help others. You are the technicians probably in your family, in your circle of friends. So this is where you need to or can make a difference for others. You can also, of course, extend that to bike repair or some kind of larger second-hand market events, but you get the idea pretty much. There are also, like depending on which field of area you're now looking into, a lot of activities to try to address issues within a certain field. Since our research group is working in the direction of sustainable and resilient food production, here now comes a food production example, but you could of course also apply that in any other context. So if you're looking at traditional agriculture now, it's very much relying on heavy machinery, a lot of fertilizers and pesticides, all of them not using our environment in a very sustainable way that can continue like this for another 100 or 200 years. Side effects are already present, like cancer linked to various pesticides, fertilizers being extremely resource intensive in their production, but also having side effects on the ecosystems where the fertilizer is used. So what are concepts and approaches to do that differently, to do it in a sustainable way, but also in a way that the food production is resilient towards the challenges that resource scarcity, climate change events might lead to. So this is, of course, once again, not a comprehensive list, just like some approaches where, for example, you can go in direction of agroforestry. Instead of having like one large field, you mix trees and shrubs with some crops that you harvest on a regular basis. You can also move from annual crops like wheat that we have to crops that stay there for several seasons, which then has a lot of benefits for soil, CO2 emissions, blah, blah, blah. So there are a lot of approaches there. Permaculture and silvopasture are just like some other concepts there. I could probably do just 3 lectures on those concepts, but they all have in common a goal to utilize the resource, farming land, arable land, food production capacities in such a way that they will remain intact for a long time or can even recover from misuse in the past through traditional agriculture or the example that we're having here in Goslar from environmental pollution due to mining operations. You will find examples when you go looking a little bit deeper into this. So this is now the abstract thing, like what are new farming concepts, food production concepts that are more sustainable and more resilient than traditional agriculture. Of course, that also has a more precise and applicable questions attached here. So if you, for example, now say you have a garden and you think about not large scale 10 hectare fields, but how do I do this on a small scale, maybe even in cities or in some kind of community garden systems, you'll probably then find other questions to be addressed. But in general, having your own garden and producing food, maybe even in a food co-op garden, is one of the best ways to get people into sustainability. So please get a garden. By the way, this is one of our, the quality here is really shit. I hope you can see the proper picture on the slides later. But this is, by the way, one of our gardens that we have. So we have something like 1,000 square meters where we produce food. And it really helps against stress. But this is like more a personal note. The other thing about getting people into sustainability-related topics, was true. Like food and gardening is a really good entry point for people. As an extension or addition to concepts where you think about resilient and sustainable food production, there are also, of course, like these technical questions, like how do I do this, for example, in a small garden, or if I even have less space in some kind of a urban setting. I can then again make that to scale when I say, okay, I do this now in an indoor production context because the outside environment doesn't allow for stable growth condition anymore. Then you can turn this quite easily also in automated vertical farming, hydroponic production facilities where you have one input and at some point you get the tomato out, something along those lines. And of course, we talked about this in the short history on political inaction. You can, of course, also go into the political direction. Become a politician, do something there. You can also go in the activism direction, whether it's Friday for Futures, XR, Last Generation, Just Stop Oil, or any new founded organization of your choice. That is up to you. But it's also one way to address this paralysis, or this fear-based paralysis of not knowing what to do, but being scared and uncomfortable. Do something. Go to a demonstration. Find people that care about the same problem. Find a solution. Once again, do something. And since those protest movements always or often have a difficult standing in certain parts of societies, just a few encouraging words for motivations from the United Nations Secretary General, who is quite in favor of you. And now going back a little bit to the last lectures where we had Graeber and like changing economic systems, having a different understanding of what jobs are supposed to do, whether we need to make a profit at all times, leads us essentially to also maybe potentially relevant questions for your future. So maybe you're not happy to work your ass off just so that your boss can have this next Lambo or the next Ferrari. Maybe you're looking for something more meaningful, not just in terms of what you work on, but also who gets to benefit from the work that is done. Of course, like you can just go to Volkswagen and make sure that the Volkswagen people remain rich, including their shareholders. Or you can, of course, also look into alternative form of collaborating to achieve a certain means. From a legal perspective, there are so-called cooperatives where people come together to tackle a certain task and then sell the produce, for example, of a shared farming operation. Instead of having a profit-driven GmbH in Germany, you can also have the non-profit version, the GmbH. You can have cooperative communities that come together to solve particular problems. So there are options. You just have to look for them and then decide whether this may be something that makes your life nicer. Also, when you're now graduating at some point, you probably have to ask yourself the question, okay, where do I work now? You might either be in a very dire financial situation where you have to take any job you can get, or if you're in a more comfortable situation, also thinking about, okay, what am I going to do here the next 50 years? Am I going to be part of the next Volkswagen scandal, or am I looking for something more meaningful? So, especially on the local level, there are a lot of opportunities. And also when it comes to the salary and the amount of money that you have to make, the sustainability aspect comes there to help you a little bit, because the less you consume, the less money you also need to survive in the system, the less hours you have to work. But those are now like this, not random rambling, but like a very condensed list of giving you a little bit of food for thoughts, okay, what to do now. Of course, you are not supposed to now join all 60 climate change related activism groups, do food sharing on the side while looking for a sustainable job, founding a food cooperative, and being a politician. Of course, this is just like a very condensed way to get you like something to maybe think about. Quick anecdote: when I was researching some aspects of this sustainable of this alternatives to profit-driven companies, I got somehow side-wheeled into looking for sustainable business cooperatives because I was looking for a particular example, but I could not remember the name. And for whatever reason, the first thing that showed up on Google, so on the very top of the list, was Aramco's sustainable business, building a better future. You remember who Aramco is? Those assholes who are responsible for just this one company for 4.5% of all greenhouse gas emissions in a period of almost 30 years. So very nice advertisement that is most definitely not greenwashing because I don't want to get sued by Saudi Aramco. Good. That was just a side note. So there are also other alternatives that worked somewhere else that, to the best of my knowledge, haven't been tried here. It's already been quite a while that they tried this in Wales, so England, UK, one of those things there. They had the One Wales, One Planet project or foundation, something like that, where within the time frame of one generation, they wanted to test certain sustainability concepts with the goal of making sure that Wales only uses its fair share of the Earth resources. So if you essentially calculate the planetary boundaries for Wales or the resource consumption and environmental damage that Wales is allowed to do, or like what the fair share of Wales would be. And they also wanted to go into zero carbon emissions for both use and construction. And they did quite some interesting projects there. There was a lot of blah blah involved, of course, also. But they also allowed for quite interesting participation systems where normal citizens could make proposals and then get awarded some kind of financial support or help from the government from this funding pool. There have been, for example, the opportunity that you get access to restricted land, and you are allowed to live on this land in a sustainable way as long as you make sure that you're not crossing the planetary boundaries of that place. So you had to write down up to every single raspberry or whatever you took from that land, you had to write this down. And then in the end, make essentially a calculation, okay, this is what the land provided, this is what we took, this is what we gave back by having some kind of restoration efforts there. And only if, after all numbers have been crunched, you're positive, you can stay there. The idea essentially being to understand and learn what styles of living could be compatible with such an approach. Because if you want to get Wales to, like the whole country, to make sure that they don't using more than their fair share, you have to start also like with one person, or one family, or one community. Like, how can you do that? What works, what doesn't? And essentially, they made a lot of those restricted areas available for such kinds of experiments, sometimes larger groups, sometimes families, sometimes smaller groups. And a lot of prototypes and test communities were created in this way. So either single homes for families or cooperative communities, and they learned it quite a lot. Problem is now, after money and funding is not available anymore, a lot of those systems somehow collapse because they have been dependent on the financial resources. But it's an idea. It was an idea, people learned something, now fix the downsides of what you've learned, if it's a promising direction. I'm essentially just saying, if you find resources to test something, you can learn it goes in the right direction. And it was like very fascinating. There are quite a lot of interviews and even some YouTube documentary style things where they interviewed people who participated in this program, so quite nice. So wrap up, before I can't stop rambling or making up new ideas. Back to the Kate Marvel quote, courage is the resolve to do well without the assurance of a happy ending. You do not have to be a sustainability saint. It's not about who's more sustainable than the others. It's essentially about being as sustainable as possible. It still makes a difference. I know it's shifting a little bit the blame of doing something towards you, but let's be honest, Exxon and Shell are not going to do something unless they are forced to do something, and there are people working at Shell. So, like, do something to change this perspective. Small progress is better than no progress. That's probably also true when you're now preparing for the exam, and if you have some kind of adversity to continue studying. Silence, being active, supports the destruction of our planet. You could say probably the same about future and upcoming elections in Germany and in the past in other countries. Do something instead of giving up right away. Lead by example, because you are the educated people. You are the people who are supposed to be in leading positions after you finish studying. So go, lead. And that's pretty much all we have. I think this was now slightly more than the 45 minutes I promised last week. But this is it. Lecture done. No more exercises, no more discussion sessions, just one more exam Q&A next week at a time that Nelly is probably gonna post, because I now forgot whether we're gonna do it during the exercise slot or the lecture slot. I was just informed we're gonna do the exam Q&A during the normal lecture slot. We're gonna do it online. You don't have to come. We're all gonna be online. But Nelly's also gonna send a reminder email out so that everyone knows that this is a point where you can ask further questions. And yeah, thank you very much for being here. As I already mentioned many, many times, please give us feedback. Please give us ideas, especially now this last part. Was there something that was useful for you? Do you have ideas to make it better? Always appreciating feedback. Otherwise, we wish you all good luck with the exam and hope to hear back from you at some point in the future. Thank you very much. See you. Bye-bye.